The gunshot echoed through the canyon just as the first drops of rain began to fall, and Willow Kincaid knew she had made a terrible mistake trusting the stagecoach driver, who now lay dead at her feet with her jewelry box clutched in his traitorous hands. She ran, her leather boots slipping on the wet rocks as the October storm opened up above her, soaking through her traveling dress of deep green wool within minutes. The Arizona Territory in 1878 was no place for a woman alone, especially not in the wilderness between Holbrook and the silver mining camps, where she had been headed to meet her brother. She had no horse, no supplies, and no idea which direction would lead her to safety as the cold rain pelted down harder, turning the dusty trail into treacherous mud. Willow's teeth began to chatter as she stumbled forward, her arms wrapped around herself for warmth that would not come. The dress clung to her body, heavy and freezing, and she could feel the chill seeping into her bones. Night was falling fast, and with it came a cold that seemed impossible in a place she had always imagined as nothing but desert heat. Her dark hair had come loose from its pins, hanging in wet ropes down her back, and her vision blurred with rain and exhaustion. She had been traveling for 3 days from St. Louis, and the murder of the driver had happened so suddenly, his partner turning on him over whatever scheme they had been planning, that she had barely grabbed her carpet bag before fleeing into the rocks. She did not hear the horse approach until it was nearly upon her, and she spun with a gasp, nearly falling in the mud. The rider pulled up sharp, and through the sheets of rain she could make out a tall figure in a dark duster, a wide-brimmed hat pulled low against the weather. For a moment neither of them moved, and Willow's heart hammered in her chest as she calculated whether she had the strength to run again. "You hurt?" The voice was deep, rough, but not unkind. "No," she managed, though her voice shook with cold. "I need help." The man dismounted in one smooth motion, leading his horse toward her. As he came closer, she could see more of his face beneath the hat, strong features weathered by sun and wind, dark eyes that assessed her with careful attention. He was perhaps 26 or 27, she guessed, with the kind of build that came from years of hard work. "What happened?" "My driver was shot. There was another man. I ran." The words came out in gasps. He nodded once as if this explained everything he needed to know. "Outlaws use this trail. You cannot stay out here. Can you ride?" "Yes." Without another word, he swung back into the saddle and held down his hand. Willow grasped it, feeling the callous strength of his grip as he pulled her up behind him with surprising ease. She had no choice but to wrap her arms around his waist, feeling the warmth of his body even through the wet duster. The horse moved forward at a steady pace, and the cowboy guided it off the main trail, up into the rocks where an overhang of stone provided some shelter from the driving rain. There was a small cave, barely more than a hollow in the cliff face, but it was dry. The cowboy dismounted and helped her down, his hands steadying her when her numb legs nearly gave way. "Wait here," he said, and disappeared back into the rain. Willow sank down onto the sandy floor of the cave, shaking so hard she could barely think. Her dress was soaked through completely, the fabric plastered to her skin, and she could not remember ever being this cold. When the cowboy returned, leading his horse into the shelter, he was carrying an armful of wood that he must have kept dry in his bedroll. He did not speak as he built a fire near the cave entrance where the smoke would escape, his movements practiced and efficient. Within minutes, flames crackled to life and the warmth began to spread through the small space. Only then did he turn to look at her, and Willow saw his jaw tighten. "You need to get out of those wet clothes. You will catch your death." She stared at him and felt heat that had nothing to do with the fire rise to her cheeks. "I have nothing else. I have a spare shirt in my pack. It is not much, but it is dry. He was already moving, pulling items from his saddlebags, and he held out a faded blue shirt and a wool blanket. Then, deliberately, he turned his back to face the cave entrance, his silhouette dark against the firelight. "I will not look. You have my word." Willow sat frozen for a moment, but another violent shiver shook her body, and she knew she had no choice. With trembling fingers, she began to work at the buttons of her dress, her hands so cold she could barely manage them. The fabric peeled away from her skin with a wet, clinging resistance, and she stripped down to her chemise and drawers, both as soaked as the outer layers. She hesitated, then removed those too, her face burning despite the chill. She pulled the cowboy's shirt over her head, finding it enormous on her frame, hanging nearly to her knees. The wool blanket wrapped around her shoulders, and finally she felt the shaking begin to ease. "I am decent," she said quietly. He turned back, his expression carefully neutral, though something flickered in his dark eyes. "Sit by the fire. You need to warm up." Willow moved closer to the flames, holding her hands out to the heat. The cowboy hung her wet clothes on rocks near the fire where they would dry, handling even her undergarments with a matter-of-fact efficiency that somehow made it less mortifying. Then he settled on the opposite side of the fire, putting distance between them, and began checking his rifle. "Thank you," Willow said. "You saved my life, maybe. The storm will not last all night." He glanced up at her. "I am Quincy Quinn, Willow Kincaid." She studied him across the flames, this stranger who had shown her more decency than she had any right to expect. "Do you live near here?" "I have a ranch about 10 miles north. Small operation, just cattle and horses. I was heading back from Holbrook when I saw you." He set the rifle aside. "What were you doing out here alone?" "I was not supposed to be alone. I was on my way to the mining camps to meet my brother. He sent for me after our parents died last year." She swallowed hard. "The stagecoach was supposed to be safe." Quincy's expression darkened. "Nothing is safe out here. Your brother should have come to fetch you himself." He could not leave his claim. "He wrote that he had finally struck silver, that he needed me to help him manage things." She pulled the blanket tighter. "I suppose it does not matter now. I have no way to reach him. I will take you to Holbrook in the morning. You can send a telegram from there or find another stage." The simple offer made Willow's eyes burn with unexpected tears. She blinked them back fiercely. "Why are you helping me?" Quincy was quiet for a moment, staring into the fire. "My sister was 19 when she tried to travel from Texas to meet me here. Her stage was robbed. She died." His voice was flat, emotionless, but Willow could hear the pain beneath it. "That was 3 years ago. I suppose I helped because I could not help her." "I am so sorry," Willow whispered. He shook his head. "It is not your burden. Get some rest. We will leave at first light." But sleep would not come easily, despite her exhaustion. Willow lay wrapped in the blanket, watching the fire and the rain that still fell beyond their shelter, and found herself watching Quincy instead. He sat with his back against the cave wall, his hat pulled low, but she did not think he was sleeping either. There was something about him that drew her attention, a quiet strength that made her feel safer than she had in weeks. When she finally did drift off, it was to dreams of dark eyes and gentle hands that had turned his back to give her privacy. Dawn brought clear skies and cold that made their breath steam in the morning air. Willow's clothes were mostly dry, though stiff and uncomfortable, and she changed back into them behind a boulder while Quincy saddled his horse and kicked dirt over the fire. Neither of them spoke much as they rode, Willow once again seated behind him, but the silence felt companionable rather than awkward. The landscape spread out around them in shades of red and gold, beautiful and harsh in equal measure. They reached Holbrook by midday, riding down the main street past the railroad depot and a handful of saloons and stores. Quincy took her directly to the telegraph office, where Willow sent a message to her brother explaining what had happened. The operator told her it would likely be 2 days before she could expect a reply, and her heart sank. 2 days in a strange town with almost no money, since her purse had been in the stagecoach. Quincy must have seen something in her face, because he said quietly, "There is a boarding house run by a woman named Mrs. Patterson. She is decent and will not charge more than is fair. I will speak with her." "I cannot ask you to do more," Willow protested. "You have already done so much." "You are not asking, I am offering." He held her gaze. "Come on." Mrs. Patterson turned out to be a stout, practical woman in her 50s who took one look at Willow and made a clucking sound of sympathy. "You poor dear. Quincy told me what happened. I have a room ready, and you do not worry about payment until you hear from your brother. Any friend of Quincy's is welcome here." Willow wanted to say she was not exactly Quincy's friend, more a stranger he had rescued, but the words would not come. Instead, she let herself be led upstairs to a small but clean room with a real bed and wash basin. When she came back down, Quincy was waiting in the front parlor, and her heart did an odd little skip at the sight of him. "Will you let me buy you dinner?" she asked. "I have a little money." "It is the least I can do." Something almost like a smile touched his mouth. "I was going to say the same to you." They ate at a small restaurant near the boarding house, simple food but hot and plentiful, and Willow found herself talking more than she had in months. She told Quincy about St. Louis, about her parents' death from influenza, about her brother Thomas, who had gone west 5 years ago seeking his fortune. Quincy listened more than he spoke, but when he did talk, she learned about his ranch, about the hard work of building something from nothing, about his hope to expand his herd next spring. "You ever get lonely?" she asked, then immediately felt foolish for such a personal question. But Quincy did not seem offended. "Yes," he said simply. "The work keeps me busy, but there are times when the silence is too much." He looked at her across the table. "What about you? Were you lonely in St. Louis?" "Yes," Willow admitted. "After Mother and Father died, the house felt like a tomb. That is part of why I was so eager to come here, despite Thomas's warnings about how hard the territory is. I thought anything would be better than sitting alone in that empty house. And now I am not sure what I think." She met his eyes. "But I am grateful to be alive to wonder about it." This time Quincy did smile, a real smile that transformed his weathered face and made Willow's breath catch. "I am grateful for that too." They spent the next 2 days in a strange, suspended sort of time. Quincy had business in town, selling some horses and buying supplies, but he seemed to find excuses to check on Willow, to make sure she had everything she needed. They took walks through the town, careful to maintain proper decorum, and talked about everything and nothing. Willow found herself looking forward to his arrival each morning with an anticipation that both thrilled and frightened her. She barely knew this man, and yet she felt more connected to him than she had to anyone in years. On the second evening, they sat on the porch of the boarding house watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. "I should be heading back to the ranch tomorrow," Quincy said, and Willow felt her stomach drop. "But I can stay if you have not heard from your brother." "No," she said quickly. "You have done more than enough. I will be fine here until Thomas sends word." "Will you?" He turned to look at her, his expression serious. "Will you be fine traveling to the mining camps alone again?" "I will have to be. I have no choice." "You have a choice." Quincy's voice was low. "You could stay here, in Hallbrook, I mean. There are jobs for women, respectable work. Mrs. Patterson is always looking for help." "Why would I do that?" But even as she asked, Willow felt her heart racing. "Because I would like to see you again." Because I think maybe you would like to see me too." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand. His palm was warm and rough against hers. "I know this is fast. I know we have only known each other 3 days. But I have not felt this way about anyone since I came to Arizona, and I do not want to let you ride out of my life without saying something." Willow stared at their joined hands, feeling tears prick her eyes. "I feel the same way, but Thomas is expecting me. He needs my help. Then I will take you to him myself, and after you have seen that he is settled and safe, if you want to come back, I will be waiting." Quincy squeezed her hand gently. "I am not trying to push you into anything. I just need you to know that you have options. That there is someone here who cares what happens to you." She looked up at him, at the sincerity in his dark eyes, and felt something in her chest crack open. "No one has said anything like that to me in a very long time." Then they were fools. The telegram from Thomas arrived the next morning, full of relief and worry and instructions for Willow to take the next stage to the mining camp, which he would pay for upon her arrival. Willow read it 3 times, feeling torn in a way she had not expected. A week ago, all she had wanted was to reach her brother, to have family again. But now the thought of leaving Holbrook, of leaving Quincy, felt wrong in a way she could not fully explain. Quincy found her in the parlor, staring at the telegram. "Good news. Thomas is safe and sending money for my passage. I can leave the day after tomorrow." She tried to smile. "You were right to wait to return to your ranch. Now you can be sure I will get where I am going." "About that." Quincy sat down across from her, his hat in his hands. "I have been thinking. The mining camp is rough territory, rougher than anything you have seen so far. I do not feel right about you traveling there alone, telegram or no telegram. If you are willing, I would like to take you myself. It will add a few days to the journey, but we can take it slow, stay in towns along the way. It will be safer." "Quincy, I cannot ask you to do that. Your ranch has a hired man who can manage things for a week or so. He is good, reliable. I trust him." Quincy leaned forward, his expression earnest. "Please, Willow, let me do this. For my own peace of mind, if nothing else." She should say no. She should maintain some kind of independence, some proof that she could manage on her own. But the truth was that she was terrified of getting on another stagecoach, of trusting strangers who might have any number of ill intentions. And more than that, the idea of a few more days with Quincy, of not having to say goodbye quite yet, was too tempting to resist. "All right," she said softly. "Thank you." They left Holbrook 3 days later on a cool November morning, Quincy on his horse and Willow on a gentle mare he had purchased for her, insisting she needed her own mount if she was going to be traveling through rough country. The cost made Willow protest, but Quincy waved off her concerns, saying he could use another horse for the ranch anyway. It was a flimsy excuse, and they both knew it, but Willow found she did not have the heart to argue. The mare was a pretty chestnut with a kind eye, and Willow named her Copper. The journey to the mining camps took 6 days, winding through mountain passes and valleys that took Willow's breath away with their stark beauty. They rode during the day and stopped in small towns or way stations at night, always taking separate rooms, maintaining strict propriety. But during the long hours on horseback, they talked about everything under the sun. Quincy told her about growing up in Texas, about learning to break horses from his father, about the dream that had brought him to Arizona. Willow shared her love of books and music, her secret wish to have been a teacher if circumstances had been different, her fear that she would not be strong enough for the hard life of the mining camps. "You are stronger than you think," Quincy said one evening as they made camp under the stars, too far from any town to reach shelter before dark. "You survived being stranded in a storm. You did not panic when you had every right to, and you are here now, making a journey most women would not dream of attempting. That takes real courage." "I was terrified," Willow admitted. "I am still terrified." "Being brave does not mean you are not scared. It means you keep going anyway." He poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling up into the darkness. "You remind me of my sister, actually. She had that same quality, that determination to keep moving forward no matter what." "Will you tell me about her?" And so Quincy talked about Emma, about her laugh and her stubborn streak and her dream of joining him in Arizona to help build his ranch. His voice was thick with old grief, but there was love there too, and Willow listened with her whole heart. When he finished, she reached across the fire and took his hand, not knowing what words could possibly be adequate. "She would have liked you," Quincy said quietly. "I wish I could have known her." They sat like that for a long time, hands clasped, the fire burning low between them. When they finally settled in for the night, Quincy on one side of the fire and Willow on the other, she lay awake staring at the stars and thinking about how much her life had changed in such a short time. She had come west expecting to find her brother and a fresh start. She had not expected to find this, whatever this was growing between her and a cowboy who had shown her kindness when she needed it most. The mining camp, when they finally reached it, was everything Willow had feared and worse. A ramshackle collection of tents and rough wooden buildings clinging to the side of a mountain. It buzzed with desperate energy and the constant noise of men digging for fortune. Thomas met them on the outskirts, a tall, thin man with Willow's same dark hair but eyes shadowed with exhaustion. He swept her into a fierce hug, then shook Quincy's hand with genuine gratitude. "I cannot thank you enough for bringing my sister safely," Thomas said. "When I got her telegram about the stage driver, I nearly lost my mind with worry." "She is a brave woman," Quincy replied. "She did not make it easy for danger to find her." Thomas insisted they stay for dinner at his small cabin, which was barely more than a shack but represented his home for the past year. Over a meal of beans and bacon, Willow learned about the silver strike that had finally paid off after years of hardship, about Thomas's partner who had died in a tunnel collapse, about the investors from San Francisco who wanted to buy into his claim. Her brother talked with a feverish intensity that worried her, and she noticed how thin he had become, how his hands shook slightly as he ate. After dinner, Thomas showed Quincy around the property while Willow cleaned up, and when they returned, her brother's expression was troubled. "Can I speak with you alone?" he asked Willow. They stepped outside into the cold mountain air. "Willow, I need to tell you something. I am sick. The doctor says it is my lungs, from too much time breathing rock dust in the mines. He does not think I have long." The words hit her like a physical blow. "Thomas, no. You cannot. There must be treatment, something. I have done everything they recommended. It is why I sent for you." He gripped her shoulders, his eyes pleading. "I need someone I can trust to manage the claim when I am gone. The investors will try to cheat you, but if you are smart and careful, there is enough money here to set you up for life. I have been teaching my foreman the business, and he can help you, but I need you to promise me you will fight for what is rightfully ours." Willow felt tears streaming down her face. "I do not care about the money, I care about you. You are all the family I have left, and you are all I have, which is why I need to know you will be taken care of." He glanced back toward the cabin where Quincy waited. "That man, Quinn. He is a good one. I can see it in how he looks at you. Do not let him slip away, Willow. Life is too short to waste time being alone. Thomas, promise me. Promise me you will let yourself be happy even after I am gone." She could barely speak through her tears, but she managed to whisper, "I promise." The next 3 weeks were the hardest of Willow's life. Quincy stayed, despite her protests that he needed to return to his ranch, and she was secretly grateful for his presence. He helped around the claim, his strength and practical knowledge proving invaluable, and he sat with her during the long nights when Thomas's coughing grew worse. Her brother deteriorated rapidly, and by the end of the month he was confined to bed, struggling for every breath. On a cold December morning, Thomas died with Willow holding his hand. She felt something break inside her, a grief so profound it seemed impossible to contain. She had already lost her parents. Losing her brother felt like losing her last connection to everything she had been before. Quincy held her as she sobbed, his strong arms the only thing keeping her from falling apart completely. And he stayed by her side through the funeral and the terrible days that followed. The investors from San Francisco arrived 2 days after the burial. Sharp-eyed men in expensive suits who looked at Willow like she was an obstacle to be removed. But she met with them alongside Thomas's foreman, a grizzled miner named Jack who had been loyal to her brother, and Quincy, who stood quietly in the corner radiating a protective energy that made the investors think twice about trying to intimidate her. She negotiated firmly but fairly, and in the end, she sold them 60% of the claim for a sum that made her gasp. It was more money than she had ever imagined having, enough to live comfortably for the rest of her life if she was careful. "Thomas would be proud of you," Quincy said as they rode away from the mining camp a week later, all of Willow's affairs settled and her belongings packed. "You were remarkable in those meetings." "I was terrified," Willow admitted. "But I kept thinking about what you said, about being brave, meaning you keep going even when you are scared." They rode in silence for a while, heading back toward Holbrook. Finally, Quincy said, "What will you do now?" It was the question Willow had been asking herself for days. She had money, which meant she had options. She could go back to St. Louis, live in comfort and society. She could travel, see the world her parents had never had the chance to show her. She could do anything she wanted, but when she thought about what she wanted, all she could see was Quincy. "I have been thinking," she said carefully, "about what you said that night on Mrs. Patterson's porch, about staying in Holbrook." Quincy pulled his horse to a stop, and Willow did the same. They sat there in the middle of the trail, and when he looked at her, his dark eyes were full of hope and fear in equal measure. "Are you saying what I think you are saying? I am saying that I have spent the last month watching you be kind and patient and strong. I have seen you work harder than any man at the claim, never asking for anything in return. I have felt safe with you in a way I have never felt safe with anyone." She took a shaky breath. "I am saying that I am in love with you, Quincy Quinn, and if your offer still stands, I would very much like to stay." He was off his horse in an instant, lifting her down from copper and pulling her into his arms. "My offer stands," he said roughly. "It will always stand. I love you, Willow Kincaid. I think I have loved you since I saw you standing in that rain, too stubborn to give up." And then he was kissing her, and Willow felt like she was finally, truly home. They were married in Holbrook 2 weeks later, a simple ceremony at the small church with Mrs. Patterson and a few townspeople as witnesses. Willow wore a new dress of blue silk, bought with her own money, and Quincy wore his best suit, looking so handsome it made her heart ache. They spoke their vows with steady voices, and when Quincy slipped a gold ring onto her finger, Willow felt tears of joy slide down her cheeks. The ranch became their world. It was hard work, harder than anything Willow had done before, but she threw herself into it with determination. She learned to cook over a wood stove, to tend the chickens and milk the cow, to help Quincy with the horses when he was breaking them. She used some of her money to expand the house, adding a real bedroom and a parlor with windows that looked out over the valley. She bought books and a piano that had to be hauled from Holbrook in a wagon, and in the evenings she would play while Quincy sat and listened, his expression peaceful in a way that made her love him even more. Their first year of marriage was not without challenges. There were times when Willow felt overwhelmed by the isolation, when she missed the bustle of city life. There were harsh winters and dry summers that threatened the cattle. There were moments when grief for Thomas would hit her unexpectedly, doubling her over with the force of it. But through it all, Quincy was there, steady and sure, and she learned that love was not just the passion of those first kisses but the quiet comfort of working side by side, of sharing dreams and fears, of building something together. In the spring of 1880, Willow discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with equal parts joy and terror, but Quincy was thrilled, already planning additions to the house and talking about teaching their child to ride. She gave birth that December to a healthy baby boy they named Thomas Quincy, and holding her son for the first time, Willow felt a sense of completeness she had not known was possible. Quincy was a devoted father, gentle and patient with the baby in a way that made Willow fall in love with him all over again. 2 years later, their daughter arrived, a tiny, fierce girl they named Emma Rose. Watching Quincy hold his daughter, tears streaming down his weathered cheeks as he whispered his sister's name, Willow understood that their family was built on love and loss and the determination to honor those who had come before. The ranch prospered. Quincy's reputation as a fair dealer and skilled horseman spread, and they found themselves with more business than they could handle. Willow took over the bookkeeping and accounts, her organized mind perfectly suited to the task, and together they built something they could be proud of. They hired help as the ranch grew, good men who respected Willow and were loyal to Quincy, and the small operation became one of the most successful in the territory. But success was never the point, not really. The point was the life they had created together, the family they had built from the ashes of their separate griefs. It was the sound of their children's laughter echoing through the house, the quiet moments on the porch watching the sunset, the way Quincy still looked at her like she was the most precious thing in his world. It was knowing that from tragedy and chance and a cold rainstorm, something beautiful had grown on their 10th anniversary. Quincy took Willow back to the cave where he had first built a fire and turned his back to give her privacy. They rode out together on a cool October afternoon, leaving the children with trusted friends, and stood looking at the small hollow in the rock that had sheltered them. "You ever think about that night?" Quincy asked, his arm around her waist. "All the time," Willow admitted. "I think about how scared I was, how certain I was that my life was over. And then you appeared like something out of a story, this quiet cowboy who saved me without asking for anything in return." "I asked eventually," he pointed out with a grin. "You did, and I am so grateful you did." She turned to face him, reaching up to touch his face, still as handsome to her now as it had been that first night. "You gave me everything, Quincy. A home, a family, a reason to believe in happy endings. You gave me the same," he said softly. "You took a lonely cowboy and made him whole again." They stood there as the sun set, painting the sky in the same shades of gold and orange it had been that night 10 years ago, and Willow thought about the strange paths that had led her here. If the stage driver had not been murdered, if the storm had not come, if Quincy had taken a different trail that day, her entire life would have been different. She would never have known this love, this life, this beautiful family that had become her entire world. But fate or chance or providence had brought them together, and she would spend the rest of her life being grateful for that cold rain and the cowboy who had built a fire and turned his back. showing her in that simple gesture of respect that there were still good men in the world, men worth loving and trusting and building a life with. Years passed, bringing more children, 2 more sons who filled the house with noise and energy. The ranch continued to grow, and Quincy taught all their children to ride and work the land, while Willow made sure they learned their letters and numbers, determined that they would have opportunities she and Quincy had never had. Thomas grew into a serious, thoughtful young man who loved the ranch and dreamed of expanding it further. Emma became a skilled rider who could gentle the wildest horse, inheriting her father's gift with animals. The younger boys were still finding their way, but they were happy and healthy and surrounded by love. Willow watched her family grow with a sense of wonder that never quite faded. She had come to Arizona expecting hardship and struggle, seeking only to help her brother and perhaps find some purpose in her life. Instead, she had found everything she had never dared to dream of. She had found a partner who respected her strength and supported her dreams, who worked beside her as an equal and loved her with a constancy that never wavered. She had found a home in this harsh, beautiful land, had put down roots deeper than she had ever imagined possible. On quiet evenings, when the children were in bed and the ranch was peaceful, Willow and Quincy would sit on their porch and watch the stars come out over the valley. Sometimes they talked, sharing the small details of their day or making plans for the future. Sometimes they sat in comfortable silence, hands linked, content just to be together. And always, Willow felt grateful, not just for the joy and the love, but for the hard times too, because those were what had brought them together and taught them what really mattered. As the Arizona Territory moved toward statehood and the wild frontier began to tame, the ranch remained a constant, a testament to what could be built with hard work and determination and love. Willow and Quincy grew older together, their faces lined with the years but their bond stronger than ever. They became pillars of the community around Holbrook, known for their fairness and generosity, for the way they had taken a small, struggling ranch and built it into something enduring. Their children married and had children of their own, and the ranch house that Quincy had once lived in alone became filled with grandchildren who ran through the rooms and learned to ride on the same horses their parents had. Thomas took over the daily operations of the ranch, as Quincy's back began to ache and his hands grew stiff with age, but Quincy was always there to offer advice and help when needed. Emma married a kind rancher from a neighboring property, staying close to home, and her sons would someday help run the family business too. Willow's hair turned silver, and Quincy's dark eyes were framed by deep wrinkles, but when he looked at her, she still saw the young cowboy who had built her a fire in a storm, who had turned his back to preserve her dignity, who had offered her a future when she thought she had none. And when she looked at him, Quincy still saw the brave, beautiful woman who had stumbled into his life soaked and shaking, who had chosen him and this hard life when she could have chosen comfort and ease. On a spring morning in 1905, Willow stood on the porch of their home and looked out over the valley. 27 years had passed since that fateful night in the cave, and she was now a woman of 52, grandmother to 8, matriarch of a family that had grown beyond anything she could have imagined. The ranch stretched out before her, prosperous and well-maintained, a legacy for the generations to come. Quincy came up behind her, moving slower than he once had but still strong, still steady. He wrapped his arms around her waist and rested his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" "Everything," Willow said, leaning back into his embrace. "How different my life could have been. How grateful I am that it turned out this way instead. Do you have any regrets?" She thought about the question seriously, as she always did when Quincy asked something important. "No," she said finally. "Not a single one. This life, this family, it is everything I ever wanted, even when I did not know I wanted it." "Good," Quincy said, and she could hear the smile in his voice, "because I plan on keeping you for at least another 50 years. Willow laughed and turned in his arms to kiss him, and as their lips met, she felt the same flutter in her chest she had felt the first time he had kissed her on that trail all those years ago. Some things never changed, and that was exactly how it should be. The years continued to unfold gently, bringing small joys and occasional sorrows, as life always does. But through it all, Willow and Quincy remained each other's anchor and compass, the love they had built in those early days only deepening with time. Their story became legend in the family, the tale of how grandmother and grandfather met, told and retold to wide-eyed children who could barely imagine a time when the ranch did not exist, when their strong, capable grandmother had been a frightened young woman lost in a storm. But Willow remembered. She remembered every detail of that night, the cold that had seeped into her bones, the fear that had threatened to overwhelm her, and then the miracle of Quincy riding out of the rain like an answer to a prayer she had not known how to voice. She remembered the way he had built the fire with careful hands, the way he had turned his back without being asked, the simple dignity of that gesture that had told her she could trust him when she had no reason to trust anyone. That was the moment, she realized, looking back across the decades. That was when she had begun to fall in love with him, though she had not recognized it at the time. In that single act of respect and decency, Quincy had shown her who he was, and every day since had only confirmed what she learned in that cave. He was a man of honor, of kindness, of quiet strength that never needed to prove itself through bluster or force. He was the best man she had ever known, and she had been blessed beyond measure to spend her life with him. As Willow entered her 60s and then her 70s, she sometimes thought about writing down their story, putting it all on paper so that future generations would know exactly how it had been. But somehow the idea of reducing it to words seemed impossible. How could she capture the way her heart had raced the first time Quincy smiled at her? How could she describe the feeling of riding through the desert with him, of building a home and a family from nothing but determination and love? How could she make anyone understand what it meant to be loved so completely, so steadily, for so many years in the end? She decided that some stories were meant to be lived rather than written, and her life with Quincy was one of those stories. It was there in every room of the house they had built together, in every fence post Quincy had hammered into the hard ground, in every meal Willow had cooked and every child she had raised. It was in the land itself, in the cattle that bore their brand, in the horses that ran in the pastures. Their love had become woven into the fabric of the ranch, inseparable from it, and that was legacy enough. Quincy died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 83, his hand clasped in Willow's as it had been for nearly 50 years. She mourned him deeply, the grief as sharp as any she had known, but she also felt grateful. Grateful for the life they had shared, for the family they had created, for every moment of joy and struggle and ordinary happiness. She had loved him and been loved by him, and that was everything. Willow lived for 5 more years after Quincy's passing, her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren surrounding her with love and care. She remained sharp and engaged until the end, still offering advice about the ranch, still playing her piano on quiet evenings, still telling stories about the old days when the territory was wild and anything seemed possible. On a cool October evening in 1915, Willow sat on her porch and watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and orange. She was 88 years old, and her body was tired, ready for rest. but her spirit was at peace. And as she watched the colors fade into twilight, she thought about Quincy and Thomas and her parents and all the people she had loved and lost. Soon she would see them again, she believed, and the thought brought comfort rather than fear. That night, Willow Kincaid Quinn died in her sleep, a gentle passing that mirrored her husband's. Her family mourned her, but they also celebrated the remarkable life she had lived, the strength and grace she had shown, the love she had given so freely. They buried her next to Quincy on a hill overlooking the ranch, and on her headstone, they carved the words she had once told her oldest granddaughter were the truest she knew. Love is the greatest adventure. The ranch continued for generations after, the Quinn name becoming synonymous with quality and integrity in Arizona. But those who worked the land and lived in the house that Willow and Quincy had built always felt their presence, as if the love they had shared had soaked into the very bones of the place, making it sacred ground. And on stormy nights, when the rain came down cold and hard, the family would gather by the fire and tell the story of how it all began, with a cowboy and a woman stranded in a cave, and a simple act of kindness that had changed everything. It was a story worth telling, worth remembering, worth passing down through the years. It was a story about courage and choice, about finding love in unexpected places, about building something beautiful from the ruins of grief. It was a story about the Wild West and the people who had tamed it, not through violence but through perseverance and hope, and the determination to create something better. But most of all, it was a love story, pure and simple, the kind that reminded everyone who heard it that even in the hardest of times, even in the wildest of places, love could take root and flourish and last forever. And that was the greatest legacy Willow and Quincy Quinn could have left behind, greater than the ranch or the fortune or anything else. They had loved each other well and truly, and that love had rippled out through generations, touching everyone who came after. In the end, that was all that really mattered. The rest was just details, just the scaffolding on which they had built their extraordinary, ordinary life. The heart of it, the soul of it, was always and forever the love between a cowboy who had built a fire and turned his back, and a woman who had been brave enough to trust him, brave enough to stay, brave enough to choose a future neither of them could have predicted but both of them had helped create. And if love stories were meant to have happy endings, then theirs was the happiest of all, because it had been real and deep and lasting, because it had created life and joy and meaning, because it had proven that sometimes, when you least expect it, when you are cold and lost and frightened, salvation can come riding out of the storm. All you have to do is be brave enough to reach for it, to hold on tight, and to never let go. That was what Willow had done that night in the cave, and that was what Quincy had offered when he built the fire and turned his back, giving her space to be vulnerable, to be safe, to begin again. And from that single moment of grace, everything else had followed, as inevitable and natural as sunrise, as permanent and beautiful as the desert sky. They had found each other in the wilderness, and together they had built a home, a family, a love that would outlast them both and echo down through time, a testament to what was possible when two hearts recognized each other and chose, against all odds, to stay together.